Today I've got the 2026 Santa Cruz Bullit e-bike. It's the SRAM 9D build, so cabled derailleur on the rear. Basic suspension. It's got just the Fox Performance suspension stuff. So today I'm going to be swapping that out for some Fox Factory stuff. I've got the Fox Factory shock. I'm sorry, the fork here. I've got a Fox Factory shock back there. I've got the Fox mudguard for that, some miscellaneous tools here. So what I'm going to do first of all is on the Santa Cruz website, they've got the setup info for the shock and the fork. So I'm going to go ahead and spin the clickers on that first. That way I can get the right settings on the shock and the fork before I install it in the bike. So we'll go ahead and unpackage the shock and the fork and set up the clickers as per the setup and support page on the Santa Cruz website here. Okay, we'll start out with the fork here. Going on their website, I'm between the upper weight limits on the website. So it goes from 220 to 240. I'm about 220, maybe, well, I'm about 225 probably with gear on. So kind of in the middle. I won't put any air pressure in there because obviously we have to install the mud flap, the mud guard, which I'm not sure if this is the same as previous years, but you got to pull the nut on the back, which releases the air pressure. I may or may not add tokens. I'll check the tokens to see what's in there first of all. So I'll just go on the rebound and compression portions of things to start. So on the top, we've got the compression, and this one's got high and low speed, which doesn't really specify high and low speed on the website. Oh, actually it does, yeah, low and high. It's got it in parentheses. So we start from closed, so it's 5 and 4, and for both it's the same. It's pretty much the same, well, it's the same all the way down. So we'll close it all off and then add back in the proper amount of compression. So we'll go from low and then high. So low speed was 5 turns from closed, high speed was 4 turns from closed. And then on the bottom, we'll have the rebound. Got to pull the cap off the bottom. So go all the way closed on these. So 3 on high, on low, and then just 1 on high. We'll start there and see what pans out for us. So next up is the rear shock. Going to open this up. So we got stickers, we got volume reducers here as well. We'll get to that stuff here in a minute. And then we'll go to the setup for the factory shock. So rebound on the bottom, compression on the top. So we'll go ahead and adjust that stuff. So again, I'm between the ranges. So rebound on the bottom, and this is from close. It's calling for 9 and 2 or 7 and 1. So we'll go like 8 and 1 and see 8 on the low and 1 on the high and see where that puts us. So high is the bigger one. So we'll go 1 on the high and then 8 on the low. Okay. And then compression, the one at the top here is calling for 6 and 3. And this takes Allen's. So we'll go ahead and get the right ones in here. Looks like the inner is a 3 mil. Close the inner one off. And then we'll close the higher one off here. I'll be honest, I don't know if there's a right way order operations for low and high, but I'm going high first and then low, just because the high is the bigger of the adjustments and the low is the smaller. So on the compression here, it's calling for 6 and 3 straight down the board. So on the high, it's going to be 3. And then the low is 6. Okay. So in theory, that's a good starting point for the two, the shock and the fork. And then we'll add the air pressure in later once it's on the bike. So we'll go ahead and I'll probably start with the shock, just because it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. The fork's going to have a lot more going on. So we'll start with the shock on the bike, and then we'll move to the fork. Okay, so I reset this a little bit. I didn't want the bike all the way up in the air because I didn't want the suspension to unload and any kind of binding or connection from rear swing arm to frame to happen as it unloaded up in the air. So now it's just barely off the ground. So if any unloading happens, it'll be just minuscule. So to remove the rear shock, what do we got? 5 mils. So easy enough. We'll do 5 mils on either side. Check the torque specs later. So Santa Cruz's website also gives you a torque spec sheet for this stuff, and that seemed awful tight, but we'll give that a good check over later to make sure that we get it all torqued back up to the way it should be and not over tightening on the carbon frame here. So the bottom one is just going to be a solid singular long bolt that comes through, and then the top ones are 2 separate on either side. I went ahead and loosened all of them before I pulled this bottom bolt out. And again, it should be the rear triangle. I'll take some pressure off that. And we've got the flip chip here. So I want to make sure that it stays in the position that I had it in when I pull it out, so I can put it back in the way it came. There we go. Easy enough. Plenty of grease on those, which is nice to see. This bike's only got a few miles on it, so from factory. The rear shock bolt had plenty of grease on it. We'll make sure to get some more grease on there before we put it back in. And now we'll go ahead and, there's no tension on the shock anymore or on the rear linkage. So we'll try not to damage the frame, and we'll get these bolts pulled out. Lots of grease in there, which is nice to see, so I want to make sure I get my hands wiped off. Okay, so the stock rear shock is out. I'm going to do some cleanup because I do have some mud in there, and then we'll get the factory one back in there. Okay, this is going to just be opposite of what we did. I'm thinking I'm going to go with the top ones first and the bottom ones. I'm going to add a little grease to the bolts before I put them in, and then we will slide the new shock in the frame. So I've just got some waterproof grease here. We're going to grease up the bolts real quick and then wipe down the threads so we're not coating threads with a bunch of grease. And obviously we're going to hand tighten this as you do with everything, so you don't cross thread any bolts. And once I get all the bolts in, we'll refer to the torque specs on Santa Cruz's website and make sure that we get the right torque values for this stuff. So the lower bolt still got plenty of grease on it, so I'm going to forego adding any more grease to the lower bolt. One thing that looks like, make sure to transfer over the bottom bearings, which I didn't do, so we'll have to do that. Hopefully I can do it without taking back out the shock, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, as far as the bottom shock bearings go, it looks like you just press them and then pull it out. Make sure not to lose all the pieces. You got little tiny rubber grommets, you've got larger pieces, so make sure not to lose all that stuff when you're swapping them over. And we'll make sure we get it all back in the order that it came out. All right, luckily enough, I was able to get all those back in without having to pull the shock again. So swapped over the lower linkage spacing, I guess you would say it is. And now we need to line up the bolt to get it back into the shock. And then we'll check the torque specs and tighten it all back up. So as I was checking out the torque specs of this, something that I forgot to do that's on me is we're supposed to blue Loctite the bolts. So Loctite 242, the blue stuff, got to add a little dab of that to the bolts. So let me pull them back out real fast and just do that. So the bottom bolt calls for 15.6 Newton meters and the top bolts call for 16 each. So we'll go ahead and use a torque wrench and torque those down now. All right, that's the rear factory shock swapped out. Pretty easy overall, pretty easy job there. Just make sure you're greasing your pivot bolts, using Loctite on the threads, and using a torque wrench, especially with the carbon frame. You want to make sure you're using the torque wrench on that. All right, next up I put the bike back up high in the work stand, which is a little tricky with the e-bikes. 50 pounds is not as easy to do when you got to juggle the bike, lift the stand, spin the clamp. So we're going to do the fork swap now. So we're going to pull the front wheel. Down here, we're going to pull the brake line guiding bolt. We are going to drop the, undo the handlebars. And I've got a cool tool from Park Tool that basically will hold the handlebars. It'll hold the brake line, the brake caliper, and then it's got a spacer for your brake calipers so they don't close. So we'll drop the fork, slide this up in, and then this will hold our cockpit together while we remeasure the fork, cut the new fork, and then get it all put back in. So we'll go ahead and do all that now. So first step is we're going to pull the caliper, and 5 mil to pull the caliper off the fork. So we'll have to do the caliper and then the caliper bracket separately. The nice thing is with this is these are all the same size bolts, so there's no threat of mixing up those bolts. But if they were different, you want to make sure you're checking your bolts and making sure that you're not swapping the bolts where they need to be. So caliper line bracket, which is tiny, a tiny little guy, probably a 2.5 maybe. Let's look at the 2.5. Yeah, it's a 2.5, and this is like 1 inch-pound maybe, 1 foot-pound, so delicate with that guy. And then next up is the wheel, so maybe a 6. So that's a 6. So we'll loosen the pinch bolt on the axle. So we can slide the axle out, support the wheel, make sure your caliper's not caught up in your spokes. I'm gonna set that off to the side. Throw the axle back through there. Actually, the new fork comes with an axle. So, okay, next step is we're going to loosen the top cap on the fork, 5 mils. And this is where we're gonna loosen this, and then we're gonna start stacking things off to the side in the order they came off of to make sure that we get the everything put back in the right order. I'll grab my cockpit spacer tool so I can go ahead and slide everything back in and not let it dangle too much. So, go ahead and loosen the cockpit, making sure that we got our fork supported so we don't drop our fork on the ground. That was a little harder to do than I remember with one hand, but we got it sorted. Drop this down a little bit to give us some slack in our caliper line. And our caliper will mount back to this guy. So it's nice and secure out of the way for us. Okay, so next up we're going to want to remove the lower bearing and then the crown race. And I didn't even check if this is a split crown race or not, so we're gonna hope that it is, and it doesn't look like it is, which is gonna make my life a little harder than I want it to be. So we're gonna have to get in there and gently pull this crown race out. And hope that we can get it back on. All right, so it's not a split crown race, it's a press fit crown race. So I'm just gonna have to get in here gently with the screwdriver. And this is not the ideal way to do this. Make sure I don't damage anything, but there's a little notch on the back of the fork that you can get a screwdriver in. And gently pry it to the taper, and it should start coming off. Just gonna work my way around now that I've got it unseated just a little bit so I don't end up bending it unevenly as I'm putting pressure on one side and not the other. Okay, there's the crown race off the fork stem. Now we got to transfer that to, well, we've got to measure the new one, and then we've got to transfer it over to the new one, but we got to measure the new one and then cut the new one to length. So we're getting the right length, and you do that without the crown race on because you want a good solid measurement. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So we'll measure the old one, and I'm showing 8 1/4 exactly. 8 1/4. So we'll transfer that measurement to the new one and score it for our marking. So the new one comes in, just for your information, at 9 1/2. So we got to remove a little bit, not too much material. So we'll go down to 8 1/4 and mark it. So we've got the new one marked. Last time I did this, I did it with a hacksaw, which was, I'll be honest, kind of a pain, even with a brand new blade. So this time I'm going to do it with a pipe cutter. It's definitely cutting it. Much easier than the hacksaw, and I'll be honest, way less messy. The hacksaw had shards of metal everywhere. So this is much preferred and seems like a much better way. Okay, just about there. I can feel it starting to come through the... There we go. Okay, much better. Still a little bit of metal shavings, but not nearly as bad as the hacksaw. The hacksaw was brutal with the metal shavings. So next up is we're going to file deburr the edge here. Okay, I want to point this down so the shards go away from the stanchions and we don't get any shards in the stanchions. Okay, next step is setting the star nut, which admittedly I am not a fan of my tool. It's a Park tool, TNS-1. And the problem that I have with it is it doesn't have a sheath. You can't see. It doesn't have a sheath that goes over the fork tube. So there's no guide to get it in there straight until it's all the way in there. So initially you screw it on and you got to bang it in, but it goes in crooked. Anyway, it's just kind of a pain. So it works, but I have one on order, never showed up. So we'll have to see what, a new one, I should say, an order, and it never showed up. So we'll go ahead and get that hammered in. It does set it at the right depth. It just is a little tricky to get going in straight. Okay, this is the part where I hope I don't run into any issues because I don't have a crown race setting tool. And I've done this before and I thought I did. I don't know what happened to it. So I'm hoping that the crown race we can get set without too much of a hassle, because yeah, that's gonna be tough. I need a pipe or a set tool, and I don't have either. In the effort of not being lazy and just going to the store, I'm going to try gently using a plastic pick and a hammer and just working my way around, which I don't have high hopes for, but we'll see if I can't get it moving in the right direction. The problem is just holding it steady while I do this. Well, much to my surprise, that fully sat. Yeah, I didn't think that was gonna work. Just the soft blunt end of a plastic pick. Definitely not the best way to do it, because you could certainly damage the seal, but I mean, yeah, it sat it just fine, so that's good. All right, we'll go ahead and put the lower bearing on here, making sure that we clean it and grease it. So we'll go ahead and clean it up and then throw some fresh grease on there. So now I had to check, there's a tapered end and a non-tapered end, and the non-tapered goes down and it fits the crown race flush. But what was throwing me off is the wording on it. It's a Cane Creek headset. The wording on it in the, what I assume is the correct orientation, is upside down. So I had to check up in the head tube of the bike, and there's a chamfered edge in the head tube, which looks like it would fit the tapered end on this. So I'm imagining this is the right way up, even though the wording, the lettering is upside down, if that makes sense. You would think they put the lettering right side up, but it's not. Right on. So that's set up. I'll go ahead and put our top cap back on. So tighten the top cap, loosen the stem so we can get everything pulled up tight, because if the stem's tight, top cap's not going to pull it all together. So we'll loosen the stem so we have enough play there so the top cap can pull everything up tight. There we go. Now we got the wheel and the caliper. I'm gonna add a little grease to the axle in the wheel. Not necessarily the axle itself, just the axle in the wheel. That way, just a little bit. So we got that greased up. Slide her in. So this is 9 Newton meters on the axle, so we'll go ahead and tighten that to 9 Newton meters. 9's not a lot, but we'll make sure we get it torqued. So we're going to torque the axle, and then we're going to gently put the brake caliper on. We're not going to tighten the caliper down because we need to center the caliper on the wheel first. So we're going to go ahead and put the bracket on, tighten that down. But we need to make sure our caliper is centered on the rotor before we tighten her down. So the caliper has ovaled bolt holes. So you'll get it on there-ish, and then you'll spin the wheel, grab the brake, and it should center the caliper, and you'll hold the brake, and then you'll tighten the caliper onto the caliper bracket. So the caliper's on, but it's loose. So I'll probably end up dropping the bike. Well, first of all, I don't have the brake hose routed correctly, so I gotta take the caliper back off and put the caliper on the inside of the wheel, or the hose on the inside of the fork. So currently the brake hose is on the outside of the fork, so I'm going to have to take it off and put it routed on the inside of the fork. So I'm glad I caught that. So we'll take this and we'll route it inside the fork and then back around. That way it's just a preventative to keep the brake hose from snagging on anything as you're riding, trees or branches or whatever it may be. You don't want that brake hose outside the fork because there's a potential for it to snag on stuff. So put the caliper back on, the caliper bracket, semi-loose, and then we'll get the hose clamp clamped on. So now we'll get the hose clamp clamped on, get that up and out of the way so we don't have to worry about it hitting anything. And this is like ever so gentle. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna drop the bike down and compress the suspension. And then that'll allow me to make sure the wheel is centered on the axle, which it should be because there's spacers, but also keep the axle or the suspension from binding. And then I will be able to center the caliper once I've compressed the suspension as well. So I think I need a little more. There we go. Get this hose in the right spot so we don't have too much slack, but have enough. Okay, so now I'm gonna drop the bike down and load the suspension and get everything set up that way. Okay, so we'll go ahead and bounce the suspension a little bit without using the brakes first. Just kind of make sure everything's freed up and it's not binding in the suspension. And then so the axle's tightened, so we'll tighten the pinch bolt to keep the axle from moving around. And then now we're going to use the brake, clamp the brake, but at the same time we're not going to release the brake because that'll center the rotor, or center the caliper in the rotor. And then we can tighten the brake from that point. So we're going to add some pressure to the brake so we still have pressure in the brake. Spin the wheel a bit. I guess it would help if I did the right brake. Okay, so I've got a hold of the brake caliper. So it should be fairly centered on the perch now. So go ahead and tighten that back up while I'm holding pressure on the lever so the caliper doesn't move. As I'm tightening it. And now we got brake pressure, get everything in the right spot. So the next step is just to straighten the cockpit, which is fairly straightforward. And it's very, very crooked as we speak. So I'll go ahead and loosen the stem back up. So this is just a eyeball kind of thing. So we're just tightening the stem, checking our work. One last time. To me, it seems easier to do it on the bike because you get a better view of what's happening here. And that looks pretty straight. So go ahead and tighten this guy down. Because again, our top cap's tight, which is pulling everything together. So now we need to tighten the stem so it just holds everything in place. So there we go. We've got a new fork and a new rear shock. I'm probably going to put the mud flap on now. Well, firstly, I need to pull the cap so I can release the air pressure to put the mud flap on. So let's do that. All right, I'm almost out of battery on this thing. So real quick, it comes with these red caps to protect the valve or the bleeder valves. So we'll pull those off. We're gonna unscrew the fork valve, or the fork cap here. And then we're gonna let out all the air in the fork before we do anything else, because we don't want any air pressure in the cap. Little bleeder valve there, so we'll just let the air out. So all the air is out of the fork now. 13 mils, just be gentle with it. Loosen the bleeders here. And there are spacers in there, and that's what we'll pull out to put the fender on. So the fender goes where the spacers are, and then there's two small bolt holes up there that the fender will bolt to. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull these out. So on the back side, you pulled out, on the fork, you've pulled out these little bleeder things, and then on each of the bleeders, there's this spacer that you're gonna pull off, and on the fender, that's where the fender will mount, and the spacer will give you that clearance so you can bolt these back in and have them in the right tension. All right, a little hard to see, but fender mounts to the bleed valves here. And then there's two little screws up here that it mounts into the bridge, the fork bridge. And that's pretty much it. So new suspension on the Santa Cruz Bullit.